YouTube Ozic going the Go Downs is back with some mock trades. I have several potential draft day trades here with specific details, reason the teams could trade, and potential targets if the teams do trade. So excited to break it down. Let's do it. Let's just start with a big one. This would be absolutely wild, but it is realistic. There is a lot of chatter recently that the Browns could be looking to trade down from number 2. Of course, they're going to want a lot in return because they'll be passing on elite prospects or the quarterback of the future to do so. So I'm thinking, who would go up to 2? Team that needs, a quarterback, not really worth it. It's probably going to be for the elite prospects, Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter, and I thought of the Carolina Panthers, who could use either. They can use an elite prospect off the edge, or they could use that big-time receiver. I mean, they could use the corner part of Travis Hunter as well. So be interested to see which one they would actually pick there. Let me know in the comments, but this would be a big trade. So the Panthers would go up to 2, a very, very valuable pick. The Browns would go down to 8. A lot involved here. The Browns would also get the Panthers' 3rd and 4th, and that's most definitely not enough. You're going to absolutely have to throw in the next year first. But at the same time, from not picking number 2, dropping down to 8, and you're not gaining a second round, like a valuable pick this year, it still doesn't feel like enough. So second round pick in 2027, I thought made some sense. The Panthers don't want to kill themselves with picks this year and next year. They don't want the first or the second gone next year. And the Panthers get a 4th round pick in return. So you may go, how the hell did you come up with this compensation here? Well, I went back to 2016 where the second pick was actually traded for the 8th overall pick, and it involved the Cleveland Browns, but it was the Philadelphia Eagles going up for Carson Wentz. And this was actually the exact compensation. So this actually seems like a lot. Too much, you may say at first glance, for the Panthers to give up. But in 2016, this was the asking price. This is what got it done. And typically, value goes up every single year, so it could even be more than this. I think that's a little ridiculous if it's more than this because the Eagles paid a lot back in 2016 for this. And again, the Browns aren't getting a second round pick this year in this scenario. They're getting some future picks, so it would make sense for it to be a lot of picks here. The Browns could go back, and I mean, they kind of got to, not rebuild from square one, but they weren't able to add a lot on this roster, this free agency, so they want to be able to add in several different spots. Look out for now and the future so they can move back. Maybe target an offensive lineman. I really could go several different routes and get one of the other receivers that are available. Not smart to trade back to target a quarterback. Teams don't typically do that, but could they trade back and take Sanders while they gained a bunch of picks? Certainly, the last time a team traded back and targeted a quarterback was the Bills trading back to get E.J. Manuel. So it does not happen often for a reason. It's just not smart, and it didn't work out then. Panthers would go. I'd be very curious which one of these guys they would take. They both make a ton of sense for Carolina, but they would give up a lot of picks, but they would get a big-time player, maybe the best player in this draft. I mean, these are the 2 top guys here. A deal between the Colts and the Raiders. We go back to last year. During the draft, the Colts tried to trade up for Brock Bowers. It was something I was kind of predicting going into the draft, if you remember, too. Maybe they could trade up for Bowers. They were trying to do that during the draft. It didn't happen. Bowers ends up being a star. Fast forward, it actually feels like the Colts today need a tight end even more so now than before. And it also feels like the roster might be a little bit more complete. So only glaring holes at tight end and maybe linebacker. So why not move up, get that star tight end of this class, which is Tyler Warren, an absolute dog and was a productive machine there at Penn State. So go up and get him. The Raiders, I didn't really necessarily label as a trade down team. It just made the most sense to where the Colts would have to go to. The Jets picking at 7, linked to Tyler Warren. I could see them going tackle, or if the right quarterback falls to them, maybe that. But so the Colts go up to 6. The Raiders move back. And at the same time, the Raiders are a team that could use more picks, even though they have plenty, because they lost a lot of guys in free agency. If they added Geno Smith, but it feels like they have more holes now than they did before in general, so they can gather more picks. And then, boom, they're adding players like crazy to kind of fill those holes, those open holes. And it makes some sense there. So they go back to 14. They also acquire the 2nd-round pick from the Colts. And they add just a 6th-round pick, but in a 3rd next year as well. So some picks there because the 6th overall pick is pretty valuable, and the Raiders be moving back. It's not super far, but back to 14. So get a second this year and then a couple more picks there for moving forward, so they can continue to build this roster where the Colts are a team that's a little bit closer to completing that roster. So go get that big-time tight end like they tried to do last year. Also heard the Raiders like Jalen Walker. Maybe that could be some smoke, but I believe they can move back a little bit to the 14 range and get him because he's one of those prospects that's not for everyone. Teams have to have the right role for him. He has to be able to play off the edge and off ball to be able to kind of work his magic, play his game. So I do think they can, if he actually is the target, could be smoke, then again, they can move back a little bit and possibly get him. A trade between the Lions and the Bengals. I love this one because it makes so much sense for both teams. Starting with the Lions, they have very, very little glaring holes on their roster. They might have the least in football. Edge rusher is really the only massive one. Do they sit around at 28 and maybe get the guy they want or one of the guys they like, or do they move up to the middle part of the first and get a guy they really, really like? I could see them doing that, and I could see it being any of the top edge rushers other than Abdul Carter, obviously. Michael Williams, I feel like they'll like him if he starts to slide. Shamar Stewart, I don't expect to be available there, but if he's there, totally could see that. Could it be Mike Green? Sure. And then the maybes could be James Pierce or Donovan Ezeraku. But, I think more likely to be Stewart, Mike Green, Michael Williams, one of those guys the Lions be going out for. Why it makes a ton of sense for the Bengals. The Bengals just dished out a whole bunch of money to star players. And that's mainly for the future. Big, lengthy contracts over the upcoming years. So they can't continue, and they're trying to work on Trey Hendrickson as well. That'll be a pricey raise this year and extension over the upcoming years. So they can't continue to build the rest of the roster with pricey extensions, right? They just can't do it. It's not possible. So they can give out some money here and there. So they're going to have to build the rest of the way through the draft. It's a fact. They're going to have to do it. On top of that, they only have 6 draft picks. And they weren't able to they weren't really able to go in on free agency because they were so worried about their own guys. So they got to fill a lot of holes, mainly on defense, but then you do factor in they need more guards. They need another running back. They could use a depth receiver, so they have a lot of needs at the same time being a talented roster. So trade back, sometimes trading back and having more picks than less picks that are earlier is actually cheaper, and you get more players, fill more holes. It makes a ton of sense for the Bengals. So go back to 28, and they can take best player available because, that's probably not a quarterback or receiver, best player available at edge, interior defensive line, corner, guard, any of those would help them. Go back to 28. You also get the 60th overall pick in the second round. It's a late second round pick and a 6th round pick. I mean, it could get done with just that second round pick, but the 6 on top of it I thought made some sense. So this was, I think, the most realistic one in this video. Possibly it just makes so much sense for both sides here. Every single draft, there is at least one of these types of trades where it's middle to late first round. It's small movement. A team with a lot of draft picks just goes up a little bit to hop a specific team to get the guy they want because they can afford to, while the other team maybe wants to acquire an extra pick. And I was trying to find spots where that could happen, and this one made a lot of sense for that type of trade because a couple things. The Chargers have a ton of picks. They can afford to move on from, lose one in total, and the Buccaneers don't have a ton of picks. They can end up moving back a little bit. But if you look at where the Chargers are moving to, 19th overall, who are they hopping over? I want to point out 2 teams. But the big one, the Denver Broncos, division rival. The Broncos could be interested in running back, receiver, tight end. Some of those needs are the Chargers' needs as well. And again, they want to hop that division rival and maybe steal the guy that they want. And I'll mention the Steelers, who pick one spot ahead of the Chargers, could be targeting a defensive tackle, which might be the Chargers' biggest need. So the Chargers could target in this trade tons of guys. My money would be on one of the Michigan guys for Harbaugh, Colson Loveland if he starts to slide, or Kenneth Grant if he starts to slide. Big needs there for the Chargers. In the Bucs, again, move back just a little bit, and they acquire an extra pick, which they could use. So a lot of swapping going on. 19 to 22 swap. They're valuable picks because they're in the first round, but it's not a big move back for the Buccaneers. But then there's a swap, 3rd round for 4th round. So the Buccaneers move up a round, and they add that 6th round pick. Could be a 7th round pick. It's definitely a possibility as well. So the Bucs move back just a little bit, and yeah, then they probably could target a defensive player there, edge or corner. I think if a specific edge that they want is on the board at 19, then maybe they stay put and take it. If the guy they wanted is off the board, you could see something like this happening. You could even see them moving back a little bit further, possibly, with other teams in the back end of the first round or a team coming up from the second round to get a quarterback, get a fifth-year option on a quarterback that they want. But interesting, smaller first-round one here. Here's another one that just makes so much sense for both teams, the Patriots and the Vikings trade. The Patriots come up from the second round and make their second first-round pick at 24. In my mind, I was thinking jumping the Texans and other offensive tackle-needy teams for an offensive tackle. Josh Simmons is the one that stands out the most if he's available, but Calvin Banks, Josh Connolly, these guys stand out as well. But, of course, the Patriots at fourth overall could take Will Campbell or Armand Membu. I think Campbell a little more likely if they go offensive tackle there. And that would make this a little less likely because they don't need to come up for an offensive tackle. But I also thought they could come up for, what if Amari and Hampton's sitting around? Someone like that, or maybe a receiver. So it's still realistic, still possible. But I was picturing getting out of the Texans, getting an offensive tackle. Makes a lot of sense. They have a lot of picks to work with, and if they don't take a tackle at 4, it's a must get, somewhere sometime soon because you're going to start running out of options. And then for the Vikings, it makes so much sense because the Vikings have a league low 4 draft picks. 4 is nothing. Now the Vikings do not have a ton of needs. They have maybe some of the the least amount of needs in football up there with the Lions and other teams, and they filled a bit throughout free agency, but 4 draft picks it's brutal. So they need more picks here, and I think Vikings fans would be on board with gaining more picks. But this is a tough one because not only not picking in the first round at all, you're moving back a whopping 14 spots here. So it is a little tough, but they swap. They go back to the second round, and they add the 77th pick in the third round, pretty good third round pick, and they already have a third round pick. And then you add the fifth round pick, which that one was just acquired by the Patriots in the Joe Milton trade. So, currently today, for real, they don't have a great day 2, the Vikings. But with this trade, they would be set up for day 2, which is considered the sweet spot of this draft. There's a lot of talent. It's pretty deep in day 2. So this trade makes a lot of sense for both sides. One of the more, I think the Lions-Bengals trade and this one, I think are extremely realistic trades. But of course you could edit it a little bit. There could be a different team. Do the Chiefs go up with the Vikings and try to get that offensive tackle? That's certainly possible. Other teams are possible as well. Browns again, this time they're trading up from the second round. So I think there's a decent shot a team like the Browns, like the Giants, we'll talk about the Giants in a little bit, the Saints, Jets, teams like that could trade up if they didn't take a quarterback yet and get the fifth-year option. Because remember, all first-round picks have fifth-year options on the contract. Teams love that, specifically for quarterbacks. So trade up a little bit, get the quarterback. Maybe more likely to be Jackson Dart, but what if Shedeur Sanders drops a little bit and get that guy? The ideal trade partner would be the Commanders. You do start to wonder, though. There's a lot of, it could be smoke. I'm almost leaning towards it being smoke, but about what the Steelers at 21 taking a guy like Jackson Dart or if Shedeur Sanders drops. So maybe if you're that desperate, you got to trade all the way up to 19, 20, around that range. It might be a little tough. You might have to give up a bit. But again, what if the Browns trade twice? What if they trade down from 2 and they do this, later? I guess it's certainly possible, but a lot has to happen. Thought about putting the Giants in this scenario. I think the Browns are just a little more likely. The Giants went out and got 2 quarterbacks. It doesn't really feel like they love this draft class. Maybe they like someone out there. I'm sure they do. The Browns are a little more desperate. So I thought they made a little bit more sense. The Commanders are sitting at 29, so therefore the Browns wouldn't have to go too far up and the Commanders wouldn't have to go too far back. I mean, the Commanders badly need a starting edge rusher. They actually have some needs, so they could stay put at 29 and get that, but they're also pretty limited on draft picks in general, combining this year and next year, more so this year because of all the trading they've been doing. So, and they drafted so well last year, you'd think they want to acquire more draft picks, so they can do that here without hurting themselves too much. 29th for 33. You also acquire a 4th and a 6th. I mean, those aren't super valuable picks. I mean, I like the 4th round a lot, but you go back a few spots and you add 2 more picks. Pretty simple. Browns go up and get that quarterback that they desperately need while not over drafting one super early in the first round. Here are some more teams that I definitely could see trading. We'll talk about, why and why didn't I include them in the scenarios. But Jets, Giants, Saints, mainly the Giants could be in that Brown scenario we just talked about, trading up in the back end of the first round to get a quarterback that they desperately need and get that fifth-year option on the quarterback. If Sanders falls, I think it's a little more likely for something like this to happen. Dart should be there late one. A team like the Bears, I could see them trading up because their GM Ryan Poles loves to trade, and because they could be going to get an elite prospect perhaps, like an Ashton Genty, like a Mason Graham if he slides a little bit, like a Will Campbell. Mainly thinking Genty, but do you trade up for a running back when there's so many good running backs, on day two? So you would probably question it, and I had a hard time finding a spot because you got to hop the Raiders if you want Genty that badly. But again, do you trade up that much for that valuable pick to take a running back? And then do the Jags, because they would be the team ahead of the Raiders, do they want to trade back? They already have a ton of picks. So I think the Bears could be looking to do something like this. Does it actually happen? We'll see. The Dolphins, I'm not going to categorize them as a likely trade team, but it kind of made sense because they have a lot of draft picks and they need a defensive tackle, and Mason Graham is drawing a lot of Christian Wilkins comparisons. So do they just go up and get him to pair with Sealer? And then a guy like Will Campbell, if he falls a little bit, then that would be a plug-and-play left tackle or left guard for them. So there are just some obvious fits while they have a lot of draft picks where it could make sense. I'm just not sitting here counting on for sure the Dolphins trading. Eagles, do they trade it up in the second for DeJean? Do they do it in the first this year? And they could definitely use a D tackle to pair with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis. Again, Jordan Davis is not an every single down defensive tackle, so they definitely do need another one to replace Milton Williams. Walter Nolan's got Eagles written all over him. He should not drop far enough for the Eagles to be able to trade up for him. But if he somehow does, because the random character concerns we're hearing about that I'm not really buying into that much, Eagles should be all over it. I could see Derek Harmon being a guy, and I could see, if they want an edge rusher, I could see Mike Green kind of being a guy. The Eagles, that would make some sense. But I was looking at the value, like where they would have to go to, and they would have to give up too many picks that they really value that they have. They like making these draft picks because they're so good at it. So I'm going to say a little less likely in the first round, but if the right guy starts to slip. Chiefs made some sense at first glance. I was about to have them in a scenario because it really feels like they need a big-time offensive lineman still, whether it's left tackle or left guard, and they can go up and get a guy like Banks if he's mainly the one that stood out for me if he starts to slip. So it makes a lot of sense. At the same time, the Chiefs lost some guys. They probably want to keep their draft picks and build this roster through the draft. They don't want a more expensive guy with less picks. So you could argue either side of it making sense or not making sense. The Bills, they have a lot of draft picks. They do have some needs, though. I'm not counting on them to trade up, but they have a lot of draft picks. I think a guy like Kenneth Grant would bluster their defensive line, exactly what they're missing. They could go up for a guy like that. Or if Will Johnson, the Michigan corner, because they're all about zone coverage there. Will Johnson's a zone standout. So if he started to slip a little bit, which is somewhat possible, maybe. Ravens, loads of draft picks. They weren't able to be super active free agency. They probably want to use those draft picks, so maybe a little less likely to trade up, but they have a ton of draft picks. If Will Johnson slides, Tyler Booker, I think they'll be interested. I'm blocking it, but James Pierce, there we go. James Pierce seems like a really good fit. So they could trade up for one of the players like that because they have so many picks. Seahawks, here's some trade back teams. The Seahawks, they don't need to trade back. They have a bunch of picks, but they also have quite a few holes. I mean, they might have to build an entire interior offense line this draft, but they don't want to just do that. They want to add other legit players, and Schneider is not against trading back. We know that. So they could trade back a late one guy. They could target Zabel. Gray Zabel seems like a really good fit. I think you could trade back a little bit and still get him. He possibly can go around the range where they pick or even early second. Texans, I can see them trading back. I was trying to figure out an exact target, a little trickier, but could they like a guy? Could they be good with maybe the tackles they liked were off the board? So trade back early second, get Ariante Ursary to be their left tackle. I think it's possible. The Texans also made a wild trade with the Vikings last year, and they ended up, it felt like they valued day two a ton last year, and day two seems to be the sweet spot of this draft. So they could trade back and get more day two picks here. Cardinals, they only have 6 picks. They don't necessarily need to get more, but they did a really good job drafting recently, so acquiring more picks can be pretty big. They need an offensive lineman. I like Donovan Jackson as a fit for them. I'd be fine with them taking him at 16, but they could trade back a little bit, get more picks, and still get a guy like that. It could make sense. And the Falcons have only 5 draft picks, so the second least behind the Vikings. And they weren't able to go in on free agency that much. They need edge, maybe multiple edge rushers. They need a defensive tackle. They need a corner. They could use another linebacker. They could use, a center somewhere, another receiver, maybe another tight end somewhere. So it's a pretty good roster at the same time of having some needs because they weren't able to do enough damage in free agency. So only 5 picks. They could trade back later first, get the best available defensive player. I didn't really have a specific one in mind. They can go best player available on defense there and get more picks that they really need. So, and of course, a team might could trade that I did not have listed here. It's definitely possible. The trades for the draft and the mock drafts and the draft in general is very difficult to predict because it's unpredictable. Teams do wild things. And then when you factor in trades, extremely difficult to predict, especially in mock drafts, because if you predict one to happen and it doesn't, it changes everything. So it's a big reason why the draft is maybe it's my favorite days of the year because it's just so wild. It's just so unpredictable, and everybody gets better at the same time, and we see these young, talented players' dreams come true. So something I always look forward to. Look forward to doing this content. We'll be live during day 1 right here on YouTube during the NFL Draft Day 1, and then live analysis Day 2 and 3 on our Twitter. So make sure you follow that. Like, subscribe, to notifications on. It's going to do it. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.